The property tax system is the worst tax system we have in Georgia. It is unfair to the taxpayer. It's time consuming. It fills up our government services for Board of Equalization, Board of Assessors, then it goes into the court system. And at the end of the day, people still aren't satisfied with it because they don't feel like they're getting a fair shake. So a couple of years ago, we began a major overhaul of the assessment and appeal process with the idea of trying to make this fair everywhere that we could. We had great success with Senate Bill 346. It was one of the biggest reforms we've seen in years. It has probably saved taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, and it saved hundreds of thousands of hours that are unnecessary going through that whole appeal process. We're going to continue to refine that legislation. We're going to continue to find places where we can help the taxpayer. For example, a few years ago, you had a property that you purchased and someone would go out and basically guess at how much it was worth. What we said was, look, if you buy the property in an open market exchange, free market exchange, then you can simply use that price as the maximum it can be assessed at. That gives clarity, that gives true market forces a role in determining what a value is, as opposed to human error and human guessing that occurred a lot of the time. So we really cleaned up that part of it. We're continuing to find areas that we can clean up. And for example, we want to make sure that if the government doesn't respond to your appeal or your request for information, that your value, your stated value as a taxpayer will stand. I mean, they have to live up to some sort of time requirement. So we're making enormous progress in the area of tax reform as it pertains to the property tax, and it's something that maybe a lot of people haven't noticed, but it's really making a difference. We had a very unfortunate vote this past week in the House, and I know they've reconsidered their actions, but it pertains to the charter school amendment that would simply have allowed the voters of Georgia to determine whether we're going to have state chartered public schools in our state. We know that the state has really fallen behind much of the United States as it pertains to K through 12 education. The United States itself is behind most of the industrialized world. So we have a crisis in education, and one that can only be fixed if we look at education through a different lens, and that is the lens of what's best for the child. Not what's best for the government, but what's best for the child. We need to make sure that we're giving children as many options as possible, and those options ought to compete against each other so that they're excellent options. Public charter schools have been working great in our state. Unfortunately, in a divided decision by a very liberal Georgia Supreme Court, a 4-3 decision, they decided the state couldn't charter state charter schools. We're simply asking the voters of Georgia, we'd like to, whether they think that's the right decision, whether that's the right public policy for Georgia. I believe that parents and all Georgia citizens want to give children more opportunity. I know they do, and we simply want to put that on the ballot and let their voice be heard. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people, for one reason or another, who just don't want to let the people vote on it, and it's a very difficult position to defend if you're an elected official. You should let the people vote on this. This is extremely important, and hopefully we'll see some success on this amendment eventually. And this week, one of our questions comes from someone who wants to know about the broadband bill. The broadband bill is a bill I introduced to make sure that we encourage the private sector to expand broadband across Georgia and that we can continue to be a national leader. One of the things many people don't recognize is that Georgia actually has the greatest penetration of broadband of any state in America. Higher percentage of our residents can have access to broadband as compared to any other state. What we want to do is make sure that we continue to be that leader, and the way we do that is to make sure that this is a private sector-based industry, that they're creating private sector jobs, that private sector companies can recognize that investing in Georgia, you can actually yield a return. And in doing so, more than will come to Georgia. We will continue to dominate this market, and that is exactly what we want to do. What we don't want to have happen is government competing with private sector entities and government doing so at a loss that's simply passed along to the taxpayers. Unfortunately, we have example after example after example of cities who have engaged in, whether they be cable companies or broadband companies, internet companies, and they have just lost tens of millions of dollars, and the taxpayers end up paying for this when a very good private sector option was already available. So it's not good for government to do those things that government ought not be doing. This is one of those things government ought not be doing. This is best left to the private sector, where we can continue to grow our economy.